Well, just now we understood the views regarding literary criticism by William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth was the Romanticist, and he belonged to the first generation of Romantic school. In the first generation, we have the poets like William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, and William Blake. Now we shall go ahead with one more romantic critic, that is Percy Bysshe Shelley or P.B. Shelley. Basically, P.B. Shelley was a great romantic poet of the second generation of Romanticism. Second generation is no the second generation Romanticism includes John Keats, P.B. Shelley, and Lord Byron. And P.B. Shelley was one of the poets belonging to this generation, the second generation of Romantic school. And I'm sure that you have studied a poem by P.B. Shelley in your SYBA. The title of the poem was Ode to the West Wind. Okay. Oh, lift me as a leaf, as a wave, as a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life. They were the very popular lines from the poem Ode to the West Wind. I'm sure that you must have enjoyed learning that poem. It's a beautiful poem. Now let's concentrate on P.B. Shelley's ideas of criticism or works of criticism. He's basically known for his work, A Defense of Poetry. It reminds you of Philip Sidney's work, An Apology for Poetry. So, A Defense of Poetry is an answer to an attack on romantic poetry. He wrote this particular work of criticism to answer an attack on romantic poetry. Now, what are the main concepts that he has talked about in this defense of poetry? Shelley blends Plato's concept of the ideal forms. We have already talked about Plato's ideas about literature, and now he says literature or poetry is twice removed from the truth because the ideal forms are beyond this world. The chair that we see in this world is an imitation of that imitation. That idea, the original idea, the ideal form. And then when a painter draws a picture of that chair which exists in this physical world, is an imitation of the imitation. So that was Plato's thinking. Shelley blends Plato's concepts of the ideal forms with his own understanding. He combines his own ideas with Plato's concept of the ideal forms. And out of this blending, we understand that poetry is the best way to reach as these forms and at the ultimate truth. Of course, Plato was of the opinion that poetry is something which is not useful for society. But Shelley believed that poetry can take you to these ideal forms, to reach at these ideal forms and at the ultimate truth. He thought that individual and imagination, just like Wordsworth, individuality and imagination was characteristics of romantic school of thinking, poetry, etc. Individual and imagination are defended against the neoclassicism's emphasis on order and reason. Reason, I told you, is logical thinking, thoughts. Here, imagination is important. Individuality is important, just like Wordsworth's ideas. And Plato's ideal forms go hand in hand with the romantic ideal of imagination. That's what Shelley believed. He thought that Imagination is something original. And Plato talked about the ideal forms, and he thought that Plato's ideal forms are just like the romantic ideal of imagination. So this makes us to believe that poetry is less concerned with the reason and rationality. Reasoning ability might be knowing, tarka shastra, and rationality. Rationality means again doing everything with thoughts, not with emotions, giving importance to thoughts. That is rationality. Vichar म्हणतो आपण. So poetry is less concerned with this reason and rationality, and more concerned with the spiritual and the transcendental. It is more concerned with the spiritual, adhyatma, that is the word, Marathi word for it, and transcendental. Transcendental is something beyond this physical world. Okay, that is spiritual world, we can say, not this physical world. So poet is concerned with the world beyond this world. Therefore, he thinks that poetry helps us to reach at that ideal form, the ideal world. And in his view, the basic criteria, you must be knowing criteria is the plural form of criterion. Criterion is the singular word. The basic criteria for the judgment of poetry are the imagination and the emotions, not didactic structural elements. The basic, how should poetry be judged? It should be judged for its use of imagination. It should be judged for its emotion. How to decide whether poetry is good or not? Shelley thought that we should understand the imagination of the poet. We should understand the emotions as well. The purpose of poetry should not be didactic. Didactic means to teach. Is how the poetry tries to teach the society. That is not important for Shelley. Poetry, according to him, is a teacher and a guide to truth. And this, okay, truth is embodied in nature. Nature is truth. Truth is nature. Now, John Keats says, beauty is truth and truth is beauty. So it is embodied in nature and the individual. In his poem, Ode on the Grecian Urn, John Keats says, truth is nature. So beauty, beauty is truth, and truth beauty. And this truth is embodied in nature. It exists in nature. It is a part of nature. And be natural, that's what he says. And it is embodied in the individual. It is a part of individual. It is not in science, not in logic, reason, or philosophy. So this is how romanticists gave priority to emotions over thoughts or rationality or reason. And the main area of interest in criticism means of Shelley was in the function of literature. Poetry is a teacher and a guide to truth. That is the function. So Shelley represents the shift in thought from the age of reason or neoclassicism to romanticism, which is manifested in literary criticism. Well, in the next part of our discussion, not now, in next lecture, we shall talk about the 19th and early 20th century criticism.